Hello, Tom Lavecchia here with the latest edition of the New Theory podcast. Before we jump in on our special guest today, while you are listening, subscribe to the show, whichever platform you are on, and also at the end, leave an honest review. 5 stars would be appreciated, but give me your honest review. Feedback is the cornerstone for growth. So with that being said, we had a very special guest today. As I mentioned, his name is David Dye. He's the author of Courageous Cultures. And it's interesting because, and David and I will talk about this in a second, listen, uncertain times is, an understatement. The president's got COVID. The economy is like up and down, depending where you are in the economy. There's winners and losers, and there's a whole bunch of crap going on, racial injustice and so forth. So, running a business and how you run your business is probably the most essential it has ever been, because there's no playbook for these times, unless you get a great culture. And I guess a playbook, or I know a playbook could be Courageous Cultures by our guest today, David Dye. Welcome to the New Theory podcast. How you doing today?
Oh, Tom, thank you so much for having me. And it's a delight to be here. And I got to tell you, when we set out to write this book, it's been 3 years in the making.
Oh, wow.
And, we had, a bunch of research, partnered with the university, and deep dive case studies with a number of different organizations. And we had no idea that we'd be looking at a pandemic and all the things that you just mentioned that are happening as it was coming out. And you're absolutely right. The reception among business leaders has been fantastic for exactly the reasons that you said, is that you can't go to Amazon and order up how to lead through a pandemic and all the other issues we're dealing with at this moment. Yeah. Absolutely.
Correct. And so you have the chops, right? So you have a leadership and training consultancy. I believe you're based out of Maryland.
Just north of DC.
Beautiful. And you have the accolades, Innovative Leadership Series speaker, Inc. or entrepreneur. You have the credentials. That's why you're here, right? But I want to first hear about who you are. And like I said, we'll put a link and people will read about you on the surface. But I want to know about you, David Dye, and then why did you write this book?
Me, David Dye. So I'm going to go way back. All right. If I go all the way back to I have been fascinated by leadership really since childhood. I mean, I was the oldest of 6 kids, 11 years old. I was already a single parent situation. I was left in charge of my brothers and sisters. Not a good idea. But, early on, I was facing leadership questions. And so my whole life I have been engaged with and searching for and learning and making mistakes, and then learning how to do it better. And ultimately then teaching and sharing with others how to do it. And so for me, my early career was in human service. I worked at every level, from volunteer in organizations all the way up to C-suite, and replicating organizations around the country. And in that process, one of my favorite things to do was helping people learn how to be the best version of themselves as leaders, as managers, executive directors, and so on. And at scale, that became unmanageable. I couldn't spend the one-on-one time that I loved doing. And so I started writing a blog. This is, back 2010, 2011. Started writing a blog about leadership to just get it out to those people. Well, then it got a following beyond just the internal folks for whom it was originally intended, and really built a business helping leaders get results without sacrificing their humanity in the process. And so that is at the core of who I am. It's results based, but we're going to be good human beings and feel good about ourselves in the process. And so that's at the core of kind of the quick version of my journey. And in that journey, I met my now wife. Karen and I wrote Winning Well, our first book, together. We had met online, not like the swipe right or swipe left. I mean, I would have swiped the right direction, but she worked at Verizon, and she was also blogging in the leadership space, and we met in that way.
Oh, wow. And
I realized, having read an article of hers that I thought was mine, I said, wow, I don't remember putting this in this HR magazine. And then I got to the byline, it was her article. So I called her and said, we need to collaborate on something someday. I've been reading your stuff. We're really aligned. And eventually, a couple of years later, we ended up writing Winning Well. I was living in Colorado. She was living in Maryland at the time. And after that book was published, we realized we had become really good friends. And at that point said, and it was Karen, I got to give her credit, who first realized there might be something more than just co-authors here. And so anyhow, we just celebrated our 3-year anniversary last week.
God bless. I love that. I actually love that part of the story as well, because, realistically, we get caught up in our work scenario. It becomes our social. And I know we're in a different environment, and if it's done appropriately and you meet somebody that you fancy, like, that's fantastic if it's true.
And it's so many different applications there. So, we're talking about remote work environments right now, and people ask us, gosh, as leaders, is it possible? And I'm sure we'll get into that and everything, but and we have to say, well, yes, it is. And the reason we know is we built a friendship and then ultimately a romantic relationship at the time, living 1,700 miles apart. Obviously, we didn't keep it that way, but it is possible.
Exactly. So, all right. So to get to your book, and I'll give you what I gather, and then you could either correct me or expand upon. So you talk about, the micro innovation, and I get the crux of your book as being, all right. So I'm a big Ray Dalio fan, and he talks about radical transparency and just being open and honest, those hard, honest, difficult truths, and just having everything out there, and meritocracy and all that kind of great stuff, right? But the application of it is very difficult. Where, I got to be transparent with somebody, either sugarcoat it or omit something. But what I'm saying is, I do believe in it, and I think it does, does help, right? But you actually address kind of the other side of the spectrum, where you could sit there and be as transparent as you want, but you also need your people to have the courage to be transparent as well, share how they feel, because if they let it fester, and I don't use this term lightly, it could be a cancer in your organization. So is my summary decent, or is there a lot more to it?
No, you're absolutely on the right track. I guess I would start with the reason for this particular book is that as we were working over the last several years with different organizations, and from multinational global firms down to 50, 100-person fast-growing startups, tech startups, and everything else, we were having conversations with executives, and we were hearing this common refrain. Why am I the one having to solve all the problems around here? Why don't my people see these things and fix them? And then we would go into the front lines of those organizations to do leadership development work. And we would hear from the frontline leaders, no one really wants to hear what I've got to say. They're just stuck in their way. They're going to do what they want to do anyway. It's, no one values my perspective. We're like, wait a minute, are you guys working in the same organization? And consistently, we were seeing this gap between people who have ideas and solutions and can advocate on behalf of the customer, executives who want all those things, but somehow it was breaking down. And so that's why we partnered with, as I mentioned, to do that research at the University of Northern Colorado Social Research Lab to figure out why. Why does this happen? And organizations that have overcome it, what are some of the best practices there? And certainly psychological safety it plays a big role, as you mentioned, in how all this works. But then you've got the other aspect of it, which is looking at the future. And I think that the pandemic has only accentuated this, is that the future of work has been and is, and it will continue to change. Anything that can be automated or turned over to artificial intelligence it's happening. It's not a maybe, it's already underway. And so the competitive advantage for any organization is ultimately going to be the things that the humans can bring to the table, because all the computer stuff that's a commodity that becomes table stakes. It's the price of entry. To distinguish yourself, it's what humans can do. It's the creativity, the empathy, the connection, the seeing things and solving them in different ways. And so we wrote Courageous Cultures to give leaders the roadmap to get there. And so to your point, and I love, you were mentioning Ray Dalio, and he has a great example of this that he shared in his TED Talk, and we share in the book, where what does that look like? Well, for a leader, here's the contradiction, the paradox of a courageous culture is that if everyone is doing it, you mentioned the radical transparency, if everyone is raising their hands, speaking up on behalf of the customer, solving problems, advocating for solutions, that's what a courageous culture looks like, everybody doing that. Well, the ironic part, the paradox is that if everyone's doing it, it takes less individual courage for any single person to do it.
Correct.
The challenge is how you get there. And that's where the courage comes in. And that's where leadership comes in. And that's why we say leaders go first. And that's what Ray demonstrates. You know, he shared in his TED Talk the employee of his that sent him an email following a meeting and said, you know, Ray, I got to rate your performance at that meeting like a D at best. You weren't prepared, you rambled, so forth. And if you want help, I'll be willing to prep the next meeting with you.
Wow.
You know, most of us, that's a career-ending kind of a move in many organizations. But Ray celebrated it. He celebrated. He said, "No, this person raised their hand on behalf of all of us, and that made us better." And so his vulnerability, his transparency, his willingness to go first and role model it is absolutely critical. So you're spot on. It's a long way of saying, Tom, you're spot on when you say that is at the core of it, because that's what leaders do. But then, and this is getting to the second half of your question, is to create a courageous culture, you got to create an atmosphere in which people can speak up. People can offer solutions. And there are a number of things that get in the way of that in traditional organizations. And some of them are just defaults of human existence, and some of them are problems with leadership. So those are some of the practical tools that we do in the book address all of those things.
Now, what are the things? Okay, so I kind of wrestle with this because we have a small small blog, a small podcast which is growing, digital marketing agency that is like the backbone of it. So I have a few different lines of business that we're looking to grow, and historically because we're a digital concern, we were a little ahead of the curve, the force curve of. I got rid of the office probably a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. But we still like kind of met up in coffee shops, and we met up, in different places or even at the house and so forth. But, we had Zoom pretty much before anybody. I should have bought the stock. So we were like kind of ahead of the curve in terms of the decentralized working. We ramped up our contributors and our interns to the lot of like 12. And one thing Michael and I, who works with me, runs the show, is we're remiss because, like, as an intern, if we had an office, we'd be able to kind of direct better, give more insight, Pizza Fridays, whatever that is, right? And one thing my learning from getting rid of the office is the culture is not the ping pong table and the Keurig coffee maker. It's kind of what's done in between, right? So
it's really that's such an important point, Tom. Just want to capitalize on that for just a second. We talk about culture. Our favorite definition of culture is from Seth Godin, and he says culture is simply people like us do things like this. That's culture, right? And you're absolutely right. It's not the stuff; it's the people and how they behave.
Correct. Exactly. So in the interest of transparency, because we can sit here and talk about how great it is to be decentralized, because it's a two-part question. I'll get the first part. What are we losing by the decentralized workplace? Let's first ask you with that.
It's a good question. So some of the challenges that the decentralized workplace presents, one of them is the informal communication. So like you were talking about Pizza Friday, right? Or Taco Tuesday. Those are informal moments where people are socializing, and idea hybridization and pollination and all that kind of thing happens in those moments. And we're accustomed to that as human beings because we're used to it. So now it's gone. It doesn't mean it can't be replaced. And I've had some phenomenal examples and seen some really good and been a part of some of those replaced activities, but they're different and they're going to feel different. And so that is definitely a loss. The other thing that is challenging is, our brains, we're just wired, our social emotional intelligence, all of it is wired to be with people, and there's no replacement for that. And certainly Zoom and video is better. And I have got some great extended family connections and relationships with people all over the world in different organizations because of the technology available to us. So I'm grateful for it, and it's awesome. And we have to also recognize that there is a loneliness factor. There is a an energy we're not receiving from other people factor that are very real. And so we want to be aware of that both for our own health and the well-being of our people and our companies.
Got it. Now let's talk about the how. What is your recommendation? And we'll put a link to the book so we want people to read the book. But what is your recommendation on the practicality of leading a courageous culture? You know, and again, I'll give some options. Is it, you know, more timely performance reviews? Is it, you know, is it check-ins, you know, check-in texts? Is it, you know, monitor performance? You know, I want to kind of like,
Sure.
you know, metric, non-metric, gut, not gut. I just want to, you know, share with our listeners what is the way to do it. Let's talk about the brass tacks on the execution.
All right, so let's get practical. I'm going to give you one quick model, and then let's get very practical in both of those. So, at the heart of courageous cultures is a dance. It's an elegant dance back and forth between clarity and curiosity. So, on the clarity side, you've got your hard lines, right? This is the way we do things in this organization. This is the outcome. This is how we serve our customer. This is what we do, right? And you've got ways that you do it. And then there's clarity around where you need great ideas. And so this is at the heart of getting solutions as a leader. So, you know, one of the solutions you might need right now is, hey, how do we stay engaged with one another? How do we do the cross-pollination? How do we formalize our informal communication? You know, it's not just you as the leader, you don't have to be the only one thinking about that, right? You can formulate the question. And then we go over to the curiosity side. So you want to get clarity around how we do things, clarity around this is where I need a great idea, and I really do want your thoughts. Then we flip over to the curiosity side. So how do we cultivate curiosity? One of the ways to do that is with intentional, courageous questions. And a courageous question differs from like an open door policy. The problem with an open door policy is it's passive. And the best ideas are unlikely to just walk through your door. Sometimes people don't even know they have a great idea until you ask them. So you ask with a courageous question. It's vulnerable and it's specific. Hey, what is one way we could improve our connection with each other while we're separated like this? At the core of a courageous question, it's specific. You're not trying to boil the ocean. You're focused on one thing. And then it's vulnerable because it assumes that improvement is possible. So to get those ideas, asking those kinds of questions. Another way you can do that, a set of courageous questions that we recommend in the book we call it the UGLY method, own the ugly. And it's an acronym. U stands for what are we underestimating? G stands for what's got to go. L is where are we losing? And Y is where are we missing the yes? And that's one of my favorite questions because it's those opportunities that are hidden right in plain sight, but we have to think about them. So you pick a topic with regard to working remotely, with regard to delivering value to our customers in a different way right now, with regard to facing the challenges internally with regard to racial equity in our organization, right? Pick a topic, and then you ask those questions. What are we underestimating? Where are we losing? What's got to go? Where are we missing the yes? And it is amazing what can happen. We've been doing this with teams around the world. And in 30 minutes, people are coming up with game-changing ideas just by getting the teams together, asking those questions, and then exploring solutions to whatever they surface. So those are a couple of ways that you can move from clarity over to curiosity. And then from there, we can talk about the culture building things, but those are some very practical ways, starting with the clarity. This is how we do things. And that's even more important in a remote environment. There's a lot of research that says people start making up their own ways of doing things. So as a leader, to be very clear, 100% clear with repetitive check-ins, repetitive messaging, we say 5x5 communication to help people know what's most important, what has to be done, the results that need to be delivered, right? And all of that dance back and forth is how you get there.
But in the dance, though, is it choreographed? You just got to figure it out. Like that's what I struggle with. Should I just naturally lead, in a new environment because it's so brand new, or is it a new playbook that's like super fresh and written, and I need to like follow this like kind of new playbook? Does that make sense? Like choreographed versus maybe kind of freestyle? And it's
Sure,
just,
sure. Yeah. If we continue with the dance analogy, absolutely. It's definitely an improv freestyle approach, but with, any good dancer, we're going I was just thinking back to all the dance lessons I took and so forth. There is that combination in dancing of this is the form, and your form needs to be ironclad. And especially if you're lead, right, you've got to have that secure. But from there is the flow. And so let's talk about what that looks like. Let's get, that's a nice metaphor, but let's get practical in the remote work environment. Whenever you're in a changing environment, there is a heightened need for clarity. So I like to say that the antidote to uncertainty is clarity. We don't know what tomorrow holds. I mean, with politics, with COVID, with racial equity, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right?
yeah.
But we can be 100% clear about internally what we call it the MIT, the most important thing. What is the most important thing we're going to achieve today? What is it for this week? What is it for this month? And get incredible clarity around that. I should be able to go to your organization, any organization, pick anybody at random and say, hey, what's the most important thing for the organization this month? And everybody can tell me with 100% clarity. That's the level of clarity we want to provide as leaders. Well, then, with that clarity, fine, now we've got to deal with uncertainty. And this is where we need to get curious. So, all right, so this is the most important thing we're going to achieve this month. Let's say, we're shifting our value delivery. We're shifting how we serve customers, right? Let's just take that as an example.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what does that look like? Well, as a leader, we might define the criteria. We need to maintain revenue. Maybe we were on a growth trajectory, and looking at reality, you know what? If we can stay flat, that's going to be a win this quarter. All right. We'll worry about growth next quarter. I just want to stay flat this quarter. Okay. That's our goal. That's our success criteria. Now, everybody, I need every idea we can come up with on how we achieve that success goal of not dropping this quarter. What is that going to look like? And here's the playing field. So, what your boundaries are. Here are the limits of what we can do, what we can't do. And then one of the tools that we share with people to help employees and leaders come up with better ideas is called the IDEA model. Another acronym. So I stands for interesting. If people will think about how is this idea interesting? How is it actually strategically relevant? One of the complaints we get sometimes is I've got all these younger people and they're just constantly lobbing all these ideas at me like grenades, and they're not useful. And then I tell them, like, go back to work, and now they feel shut down because they're not, being heard, but they weren't thinking properly. Well, if you equip them with this model and say, okay, I want to hear your ideas, and the first criteria is it needs to be strategically relevant to one of the main critical questions we've got right now. Then D, so that's I, interesting. D, doable. Is this something we have agency over? Can we actually take action now? If your idea requires us to have a vaccine, well, that's not coming for another 6 months or down the road. So what can we do right now? E is engaging. Who else does this idea engage? If it's just about you, probably not going to sail. But if you've got the marketing team is on board and you've got finance on board, then let's talk. Right? And then A, actions. What are the next practical 1 or 2 steps that we would take in order to actually do something with this idea? And so as you ask people for ideas and give them some time to think and teach them this model, interesting, doable, engaging, and actions, what are the next steps? People tend to contribute much more relevant ideas that have been thought through a little bit more deeply, and there's something you can actually do something with. And so as you are having these conversations, you're starting to get ideas. One of them surfaces. You say, great, this is what we're going to do. Well, now we're going to flip back over to clarity. And so now in your one-on-ones, going back to what you were asking earlier, in your one-on-ones, in your performance management conversations, in your team huddles, in your different forms of communication, you're reinforcing, this is what we're doing. This is now our way of getting to that goal. And so that's how that dance works in like a practical example.
I love it. I mean, that's, that's the thing. So then it's a matter, of execution, and the truth is, you're given the right playbook. So, David, how can we find you?
Well, first I'd encourage listeners, go to courageousculturesbook.com, and you're going to be able to find a number of downloads there, a couple of the forward, the first chapters, and along with what we call the Idea Incubator Guide. It has a number of the tools that I just shared. So you can get all of those, and it walks you through how to take your team through that kind of a process. Should also mention the book comes with a downloadable executive strategy guide. So you don't have to hire us. You can take the guide and walk with your leadership team and build a courageous culture in your organization. It's very practical, how-to driven, so you can get there that way. The other place you can go to find out more about our work is letsgrowleaders.com. Work with leaders all over the world to help you get breakthrough results without sacrificing your humanity in the process.
Love it. And I'm looking at the Let's Grow Leaders now. Love it. So David, thank you for being on the New Theory podcast.
Tom, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.